Waka and Aloha, the Precipitating Change project brings together Alaskan and Hawaiian middle schools in predominantly indigenous communities, cultural knowledge holders, and a mix of indigenous and Eurocentric educators, scientists, and researchers. Our curricular focus involves collaboratively designing, trying out, and refining multi perspective middle school science instruction that explores local coasts and coastal change. We're developing an instructional unit that aims to engage students in exploring their coasts through Indigenous and Eurocentric lenses of science, culture, and community decision making. Through collaboration, we've deepened our understanding of how historic and modern contexts of colonization underlie our project relationships and efforts. Acknowledging this foundation, we've come to see that our collaboration isn't about coming to consensus, but rather about strengthening our capacity to understand one another and communicate across the diverse perspectives that we represent. In order to create authentic, multi perspective learning experiences, it's important to understand the perspectives that we as partners bring. In this video, we'll focus on two questions, including first, how can multiple perspectives be interwoven in instruction in ways that demonstrate equity and respect, rather than some perspectives being represented more deeply than others? And second, what does learning look like when it authentically represents multiple perspectives? 5 team members will each discuss a theme that arose from our exploration of these questions. Team members' positionality statements are included in our NARS paper.
Aloha. Our connections and relationships to place are complex and shaped and influenced by our experiences, our values, and of course, our culture. All of this affects how we engage with and learn from our environment. Because these different things influence our ways of knowing and relating to our spaces. Even those of the same culture will not necessarily have the same experience on the same landscape, as each of us brings with us, different experiences, different knowledge, different skills and abilities, as well as different interests. So knowing this and realizing these views are interpretive does not mean that there's nothing to gain from understanding these different perspectives. In fact, now more than ever, it may be important to recognize the value of our different ways of connecting to places and honoring the different relationships and understandings that we have. And so another aspect of our research is aiming to better understand what we can learn from the multitude of ways that different people connect to and learn from places. So in our curriculum, we hope to help students start to consider the many ways of knowing and learning from a place. One way that we approach this is by introducing them to a variety of perspectives to learn about their coastlines from. Some of these highlight different cultural practices and worldviews. Others highlight roles, including people like their teachers, elders, or kupuna, different community members that do different things on the landscape. They may have different practices like fisher people and gatherers, scientists, surfers, tourists, and of course the communities of animals and plants that also live there.
In so many ways, language is a reflection of power. One example of this that's probably familiar to all of us is suppression of indigenous languages by forcing the use of English to communicate. In my state of Alaska, this practice extended beyond schools to include all public meetings for many years. The result of forcing the use of English as the formal language for communication has been the erosion and extinction of many indigenous languages. Now, with few speakers remaining for some languages and dialects, there's justifiable concern about keeping languages alive and in use. A challenge we've faced in this project stems from the choice to develop the project instructional unit in English first. As a result, the unit is almost all in English because Indigenous worldviews are embedded in and in many ways inextricable from Indigenous languages. This has created an imbalance. It's difficult to confer equal value on Indigenous perspectives when the unit is written in English with modest inclusion of Indigenous words and descriptive phrases. In this project, we've experienced the inadequacy of simple word-for-word translations from English to a native language as well. English words are like a code for something. The word snow is a good example. In English, we use the word to mean any kind of snow. In the Yugtung Alaska Native language, there's at least 21 different and more descriptive words for snow. As researchers, we've grown in our understanding and respect for Native languages as the most appropriate way to communicate with Indigenous students about important scientific phenomena. Consequently, we are incorporating glossaries and meaningful text for students in the Hawaiian and Alaska Native languages to show richer and more complete worldview.
Learning in a multi-perspective project goes beyond what is recommended in the next generation science standards. It requires culturally responsive teaching and activities that integrate local knowledge, traditions, songs, dances, and stories that all contribute to a more comprehensive understanding. Yet in this project, we started off with a typical Eurocentric format of question and answer to gauge student learning. As we monitored feedback from teachers and after much discussion with a diverse research team, we realized that this format was not engaging to students and was not honoring the multifaceted, nonlinear worldviews. A multi-perspective curriculum can't be boxed into what knowledge is based solely on the Eurocentric perspective. If we are really encompassing multiple perspectives, we needed to shift our design out of this Western framework and change how we present the information and understand what students are learning. We're addressing these challenges by adopting a logbook format, which will provide several resources for students to select from, such as aerial maps, historical data, information about plants and animals. Then students have the responsibility to direct their own learning with an end goal of student groups producing a community-facing awareness project that will serve as a legacy for future classes to build upon. We also changed our focus from integrating computational thinking and have adopted a more holistic systems thinking approach. We found introducing students to systems thinking was more in line with dynamic, interconnected nature of the social environmental topic of coastal erosion. And we also have intentionally moved away from the more linear, formulaic Western mindset. Our aim is to be culturally responsive, and we are realizing that the Western science approach is only one small facet within the intricate phenomenon of coastal erosion. And we are going to do our best to evolve to provide a more expansive learning outcome for our students.
While our goal is a multi-perspective unit that honors varied and complex viewpoints, we have faced challenges due to limitations with Western classrooms and science constructs. American schools are largely designed from a Eurocentric perspective that has historically capitalized on education as a colonizing and dominating force in Indigenous communities. Community schools and teachers work to create appropriate and culturally sustaining learning environments, but Eurocentric ideals that permeate school spaces can still impact teaching and learning. Because of this, the possibilities for a multi-perspective coastal erosion unit are sometimes restricted. There are concessions that must be made for time, reasonable access to beaches, and existing curriculum maps. In addition, class periods are also usually siloed into subjects, where topics like history, arts, and sciences are presented as independent rather than interconnected. Required school science content can perpetuate strict ideas about what counts as scientific knowledge, which observations are considered valid, and whose explanations are considered true. It is not enough to simply drag and drop an activity or a vocabulary word that is representative of a local Indigenous culture. We must consider how activities, language, and approaches can be taken up within a school context. In the development of an equitable dynamic unit, we found ourselves faced with these obstacles. It is in these sticky places where partner and teacher perspectives and critical discussions have contributed to shifts in the unit that help us move toward our goal of an authentic and equitable multi-perspective unit. We continue to consider, refine, and play with new ideas and designs that will holistically engage students with the complexity of the world around them, helping them to navigate and communicate interwoven concepts in science and culture.
As you've heard from my collaborators, the learning that happened along the way didn't just change the focus of the curriculum that we are writing, but it has changed the purpose of our curriculum. To successfully include science that respects multiple ways of knowing, the purpose of our curriculum has to align with multiple ways of learning about the world around us. intentionally include Indigenous languages, and acknowledge the different reasons we do science and relate to our world. Relationships to humans and to our specific environments do more than connect us to place. Relationships define how we see the world and who is important, such as having personal names for ecosystem processes and knowing the story behind specific place names. Relationships to our coasts, our forests, our food are the foundation to Indigenous science. In our traditional practices, we perpetuate our applied science, placing importance in the curriculum on the values and relationships that our students have with their beaches, and highlighting Indigenous practices, histories, and the socio-political struggles that are intertwined with the changing of our coasts, expands the way we define science. It recognizes that the physical science of a changing beach isn't apolitical. It's part of a larger conversation that recognizes the past and helps prepare us for our future. Science is lived by Indigenous people. It's not just a way of knowing. By sharing with students how beaches are created and persist, we help them see the potential future of their coastlines by recognizing the multiple ways they connect to the coast, the multiple ways they interact and create relationships, and the multiple ways we can each be present as our coasts change. We have struggled with providing the space for Indigenous languages, cultural contexts, and representing the science of Indigenous ancestors, yet we have struggled together and are motivated to create a curriculum that shares the changes our coastlines are experiencing, and most importantly, empower our learners to be present.